And
right. Obviously.
And I was not prepared for it.
Yeah.
And he said, we launched the transition committee in January. And I was immediately surrounded by, business people and lobbyists and saying, you pick this guy, pick that guy, pick that guy. And he said, and I did it. I did what they said. He said, I later came to regret it. And a lot of those people were bad people. How he talks about that. He said they were bad people.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to do that this time. I want to do something completely different. And he said, we're going to launch a transition committee starting this week. So normally the transition committee is paid for by the GAO, by the General Accounting Office. And you don't launch till after the election. But with him, he got private donors to pay for the transition committee, and he's starting it 4 or 5 months early, so that they can actually put a government in place. And then another thing he said is, one of the big complaints against President Trump has been that he's sort of a captive of the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. And he said to me, Project 2025, they keep trying to stick that to me. And I've never read it. I never heard it. I heard of it until people started telling me that I was behind it. And he said, that was written by a right-wing asshole. This is what he said to me. And he said, there are left-wing assholes and there are right-wing assholes. And that was written by a right-wing asshole. And so in that way, he kind of, disavowed this kind of ideological pigeonhole that they're trying to put him in. And I think his administration is going to be really interesting because, like you said, he's surrounded by people who are entrepreneurial, who really are common sense people who want to do the right thing for our country. And, I also came to understand President Trump in a different light. And it's easy for me to understand because I've been vilified and demonized by the press and the view of me, across the kind of the liberal landscapes is that, I'm this really insane, crazy person. And but a lot of people, I take that as gospel, as reality. And, I think a lot of the things that have been said about President Trump are the same thing. They're things that are propaganda tropes. They're very simplistic characterizations of him that miss some of the richness of his character and of his personality.
Yeah, well, that seems to be especially the case now that he has this quite remarkable team around him. So let me steelman the Democrats for a second and tell me what you think of this. I have a number of Democrat contacts, and they've been making a case to me that things have genuinely shifted since Harris took the reins, and they point to such things as relatively less emphasis being placed, for example, at the DNC on the climate crisis and carbon dioxide, a relative shelving or siloing of the more radical leftist movement within the Democrats, which, in my experience, they've declined to even admit that exists, which has been a kind of blindness that to me is nothing short of miraculous. Is it possible that there is a shift towards the center in the Democrat Party? And have we seen that since Harris took the reins? And do you have any hope in that regard? Or was your personal experience with their machinations and the problems that you detailed out so comprehensive that you think that what was that? Is too little too late or not real at all, I guess?
Well, it's hard to look into somebody else's head. So I make a practice of not doing it. But what I would say is a couple of things. One is that both Tim Walz and Kamala, and I made this point before, and then Hillary yesterday, who's kind of the bellwether for, who the Democratic Party is, all have been very, very vocal about censorship, about their enthusiasm for government censorship, and about how they're going to crack down on the social media. Nobody has spoken out about the censorship now taking place in Europe or in Brazil, where
Do you see that as characteristic of Newsom's new bill, for example?
Yeah, the bill that they have here in California, but the ban on Twitter in Brazil, the arrest of Pablo Durov in France, which is an extraordinary event, that the head of Telegram would be pulled off his plane when he stopped for a refueling stop and put in jail. And there's no reason to do that because Europe is openly censoring content already. And by the way, they do have, Pablo Durov. Pablo Durov is a resident of Abu Dhabi, and France has a extradition treaty with Abu Dhabi, so they could arrest him anytime they wanted. And it seemed to be like a deliberate signal to the world about if you mess with the machine, you are going to be chewed up and spit out. And also, I think having to do with Ukraine war, because Telegram is widely used in Ukraine and also Russia, and there are listservs or groups in Ukraine that are pro-Ukrainian and in Russia that are anti-Ukraine war, or pro-Russian in that war. And I think that it was probably a U.S. instigated. France has as robust an attachment to freedom of speech as we have in our country. In 1789, during the French Revolution, they passed all of these bills that are still on the books that make freedom of speech sacred in France. And then in the 1880s, they passed another slew of bills that reinforced and fortified the tradition of freedom of speech. So it was as robust, their attachment of freedom of expression, as it is in this country. And yet they abandoned it, overnight. And if America really was the exemplary nation, if we were the promoter of democracy around the world, we would spend less time overthrowing democratically elected governments and more time defending freedom of speech as the Western democracy has abandoned it. We would be objecting, and we would be saying, this is bad for you, but it's also bad for Americans. Right. I mean, you had this, somebody I would consider an insane person, Thierry Breton, the commissioner of the European Commission.
He quit this week, eh?
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Who threatened Elon Musk with criminal and civil prosecution if he allowed.
I know. Without getting permission from the EU, apparently.
With the former president of the United States, who is the nominee of one of our two big political parties. You can't listen to him give a live interview. He has to protect the people of Europe against that threat. Oh, and we should be objecting to that. The United States,
that's for sure.
A real President Biden, or Vice President Kamala Harris would be coming out waving flags saying, you don't do that. We're
no matter what.
No matter what.
No matter what. Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah.
It's absolute. You do not do that. You're not a democracy if you do that. And calling them out on it, there was none of that. So I think that if you don't understand that that censorship is incompatible with democracy, that is a disqualifier for being president of the United States. I worry that the things that Vice President Harris says she's for seem to be politically driven and not heartfelt. For example, her big promise, her promise about taxing tips, which she took from President Trump. And it seemed like a last minute, I'm going to do this because it's politically savvy. Her change on the border, her failure to explain why she didn't do that before, all of the inconsistencies in that seem, again, not heartfelt, but politically driven. The big signature, economic reform that she promised during the convention to give every new business in this country $50,000 gift. Okay, well, that's just laughable because in New York, there are 1,000 new businesses starting a day. That would be $50 million a day just for New York businesses. And if you gave that money, there'd be 2,000 or 3,000.
No kidding. That would be gained so fast you could hardly imagine it.
And so, she's talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And where's that money going to come from? And then, her other idea, which is just a half-baked, discredited, terrible idea about price controls.
Oh, yeah.
And wage controls. Every time that's been tried, it's been a catastrophe. There's no place.
Because no one's ever done it right.
No, it can't be done right. And so none of these seem to be well thought out. None of them seem to be part of a coherent and consistent ideology or thought process. None of them seem to be common sense. And I think that, she did very well on the debate, but anybody can do well on that debate. Anybody who can pass the bar exam, which she did, doing that debate.
The bar for her was low too, to be fair.
The bar was low, but anybody can do. You can anticipate every question that you're going to be asked, or 95% of them. And if you're surrounded by good people, they can write you up a good 90-second, soundbite. So she had these 90-second sound bites and she delivered them well. But I think her understanding of issues seems to be an inch deep and a mile wide. And that, what I would really like to see is her going on long-form interviews like this.
I'd like to see that too.
Right, and being asked a second question, a third question. Why did you do this? Explain this. How is this consistent? What was your evolution? Just asking the kind of questions that any curious interview would ask and make her explain that, and she can't do it. And this is somebody who's supposed to be president of the United States. They're supposed to be able to go toe-to-toe with our critics around the world to explain her vision, to explain her record, to explain her aspirations for our country. It seems like she does not understand the uses of power, and we're seeing that, her support of the Ukraine war and of nuclear war, and, the risk of nuclear war. I don't think she has any comprehension. I don't think she has the ability to talk to foreign leaders. I haven't seen any evidence of that, and I think that she is susceptible to manipulation because she doesn't have firm ideas about her own. I think she's susceptible to manipulation by the deep state, by people who want the war, by the neocons that run the White House now and run the foreign policy apparatus of the State Department. And I fear that she'll be manipulated by them and that those entities actually want a nuclear war. So like they did in my uncle's time and like they've done for many, many years, they want a confrontation with Russia that will fragment Russia and give us access to its natural resources and eliminate our big competitor, in the West. And all of their policies have been bad.
That's a dire prognostication. That's for sure.
Yeah. So that's why I'm worried about, her. I'm worried she won't protect our civil rights, our constitutional rights at home, and she will allow herself, America, to be dragged into really catastrophic wars abroad. And at this point in history, I think that's, we've got the emergence of all these surveillance technologies of AI. This time in history, if we get a president like that, it will, for the next 4 years, it may be too late for our country to ever recover.
Attention men who still believe in the American dream. In a world gone mad, the Precision 5 from Jeremy's Razors stands as a beacon of sanity. 5 blades of superior engineering offer a shave as unshakable as your faith that the nation's best days still lie ahead. Experience an exceptionally smooth, remarkably close shave and a testament to the fact that merit still matters. Stop giving your money to woke corporations that hate you. Get Jeremy's Razors Precision 5 instead. Available now at jeremy'srazors.com, walmart.com, and Amazon Prime.
So you laid out 3 policy areas where you felt that you could work with President Trump very effectively: health, speech, and peace. And we've spent a fair bit of time concentrating on free speech and on peace and war. And I think we'll turn to that more, the peace and war issue, on the Daily Wire side in the conclusion of our interview. But maybe we could close up, if you don't mind, with some more thoughts on the health crisis, because one of the things you've done that I think is unprecedented and that's become perhaps more part of the public discussion since you've teamed up with Trump, is to make public health a political issue. And so you talked about the public health crisis, and maybe you could lay out the dimensions of that crisis. I mean, I know there's an obesity epidemic, there's a diabetes epidemic. These are very, very serious problems. And so, but you've concentrated on that in a way that just isn't characteristic of anybody on the political landscape at all. And now it's become an issue that's front and center. And so I'd like to hear more about your thoughts, why you think that's such a fundamental priority, compared to, say, free speech and war and peace. Why health? And what you see, lay out the landscape of the problem and also the landscape of potential solution.
Yeah, so we are now the sickest country in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden in the world. When my uncle was president, I was a 10-year-old boy. About 6% of Americans had chronic illness, and today 60%. When my uncle was president, we spent zero in this country on chronic disease, zero. And today, and for many chronic diseases, first of all, there weren't even diagnoses and there weren't drugs available. Today, we spend $4.3 trillion, so about 95% of our health budget. It's the biggest, and it's 5 times our military costs. It's the biggest item in our budget, and it is the fastest growing. And not only that, so it's destroying our country economically, absolutely debilitating it. All of our other issues are small towards it. If you just measure its economic impact, it has other impacts. 77% of American children are no longer eligible for the military because of chronic disease.
And is that obesity related with kids?
Obesity is one of them. Obesity when my uncle was president was 3.4%. Today it's 74%.
And what do you think is driving the obesity epidemic?
It's
such a transformation.
Yeah, I mean, it's being driven by poisoned food, by ultra-processed wheat, sugar, and flour, seed oils, soy, canola, sunflower, and then wheat and corn, which are all heavily subsidized. So those 90% of farm subsidies, the crop insurance, et cetera, go to those 3 categories of soy, corn, and wheat. And those are the feedstocks for all of our processed foods. They turn into sugar. They're all nutrient barren. The original crops were nutrient rich, but the GMO crops are nutrient barren, and they're heavily dependent on pesticides. The point of the reason GMOs are so popular is because they're resistant to pests. The reason they're resistant to pests is because they are resistant to pesticides like glyphosate. So you can saturate the whole landscape with glyphosate from airplanes, and that the only thing that's green is GMO corn, which is Roundup ready. It's called Roundup resistant corn, and because of that, it's also very heavily laden with pesticides. Wheat. Glyphosate is also used as a desiccant, which means it dries out wheat. So it's sprayed on the wheat right at harvest, which means it's going right into the food. And when that began in 1993, that's when you saw all the appearance of all these gluten allergies and celiac disease and wheat allergies that you don't have in Europe. You can eat spaghetti here and you're going to get eczema and all of these stomach complaints. Then you go to Italy and you eat it and you get thin. Mm-hmm. But here, and then the corn is turned into high fructose corn syrup, which is just a formula for making you obese and diabetic. And Americans, diabetes is one of the diseases. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician saw 1 case of diabetes in his lifetime. So a 40 or 50-year career, he may see one case of juvenile diabetes. And today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And we spend more on diabetes than our military budget. So that is, and nobody's talking about this.
Yeah, right.
These are all of these autoimmune disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, Alzheimer's is a form of diabetes. Mm-hmm. It's type 3 diabetes. It comes from poison food.
So is it how much of it do you think is the toxin load per se, and how much of it do you think is carbohydrate?
It's the overload of sugars, because all of those grains turn into sucrose, and they're very low in nutrients. So we're malnourishing kids. You're seeing high levels of obesity, and in the same people who have high levels of obesity, there's also high levels of malnutrition. The most malnourished people in this country are the most overweight,
right?
Because they're eating food like substances.
Yeah.
And then
that's a good phrase.
And then they're covered with chemicals and pesticides. But some of those are part of the food processing, but some of them are pesticides, etc. There's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are illegal in Europe and other countries. So we're just mass poisoning us, and nobody has chronic disease epidemic like we do in our country. That's why one of the reasons we had the highest death rate from COVID. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in this country. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. And so we did worse than any other country. And the CDC explains that, says it's not our fault. It's because Americans are so sick. CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases.
Right.
So it wasn't COVID, it was killing them. It was chronic disease, right? And we had the sickest, we have the highest chronic disease burden, we have the highest COVID death rate. But it's not just, it's those autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes, lupus, Crohn's disease, all this IBS. All of these things had suddenly appeared in the mid-'80s. That, I never knew anybody with any of those diseases when I was a kid.
Yeah, right.
The neurological diseases, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, sleep disorders, Tourette's syndrome, ASD, autism. Autism rates in my generation, 70-year-old men, is about between 1 in 1,500 and 1 in 10,000. That's what it is today. My children's generation is 1 in every 34 kids, according to CDC, 1 in every 22 in California. So, and it is devastating our generation. It's our economy. It's going to cause autism alone. So there's a recent paper by Mark Blaxell that shows it'll cost $1 trillion a year by 2030. And then the allergic disease again, which I never saw as a kid. I had 11 siblings, 70 first cousins. I never knew anybody with a peanut allergy. Mm-hmm. I do 5, but my 7 kids have allergies. It's.
So you're up against some major forces in fighting that particular battle. I mean, first of all, you have to sway public opinion in that direction, and then there's going to be a massive force arrayed against any possible interventions. That's for sure. So tell me what you think you could do, and also tell me why you don't think you would be stopped.
Well, I think they're going to try to stop us, but I've been thinking about this for 40 years, so I know how to do it. And I've worked with Mark Hyman and Kelly Means and Casey Means and a lot of other people to figure out how to do it without having to go to Congress. To do it all with executive orders and policy changes. And, I'll give you one example. I mean, you can get fluoride out of the water by executive order, out of the water systems all over the country. And that is, that's a big issue with public health and cancer, et cetera. But there are other things like it would be very hard. You never get congressional approval to ban glyphosate, which is causing all kinds of health problems and cancers all over this country. And so But here's what you can do. NIH has a budget of $42 billion a year, and it distributes that money to 56,000 scientists who are at research centers, mainly universities in North America, and Canada, the United States, and some in Europe. And they're supposed to be doing basic science, but what they really do nowadays is they do drug development for the pharmaceutical industry. So NIH is now the primary incubator for new pharmaceutical drugs. And it changed that rule, that changed. NIH used to be the primary scientific agency in the world. It changed, that changed in 1980 because we passed a bill called the Bayh-Dole Act that allowed NIH itself and NIH scientists to collect royalties on any pharmaceutical product that they developed. So now that they follow the money, and now what NIH does is they're in a partnership with pharma. They develop new products to treat chronic disease, and anybody who tries to study the etiology, the origins, the causes of chronic disease, that scientist will be blackballed forever. And so what I'm going to do is change NIH and say we're going to make the primary purpose of this agency to develop science on what's causing chronic disease. Right now, there's very little science that says high fructose corn syrup causes diabetes. That's deliberate. We don't have that science because the agency does not want to see that science. I'm going to make sure that science happens. Not one study, but not just 20 studies, but 100 studies that show that. Now, what happens when you have 100 studies? There is a rule in the federal courts in this country called the Daubert rule. And that says that if you believe you got sickened by a product, like say you think Coca-Cola made you obese, you can't sue Coca-Cola unless there's at least a critical mass of studies, maybe 20 or 30, that say that that's what it does.
So it's a liability enhancer.
Well, the judge has to make that decision about whether you've passed the Daubert threshold before he allows you to go to a jury. So in a big case, like when I tried the Monsanto case, I was part of the trial team. The big threshold is, can you pass Daubert? And we had about 20 studies that showed that Monsanto, that Roundup caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we had mouse studies, we had rat studies, we had animal studies, bench studies, observational studies, epidemiological studies, so a good range of all different kinds of studies that show that once you get that critical mass, then you can go to a jury. And once that happens, the product is through. So when we sued Roundup, we had 40,000 home gardeners who had gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup in their backyards. And the way that you try multi-district litigation, you try one of those cases at a time, right, and one after the other in rapid fire, till somebody says, uncle. You either lose them all, and then you run out of money because it costs a lot of money to try a case, or you win them all, and the maker of that product then has to come to the negotiating table and settle it. We won $289 million in the first trial. We won $89 million in the second. The third trial, we asked for $1 billion, and we got $2.2 billion from the jury. And then Monsanto came to the negotiating table, and we settled the cases for $13 billion, and they agreed to take Roundup, to take glyphosate out of home gardening products. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what you do.
Got it.
Once enough science is out there, you don't have to legislate it against high fructose corn syrup. The lawyers are going to come out of the woodwork.
Okay.
And they're going to be representing 1 million kids with diabetes. And the company is going to say, we're not going to make this product anymore.
All right. Well, you're on a tight timeline. I'm going to continue this discussion on the Daily Wire side. I think I'm going to drill down more into foreign policy and the state of the world with regards to the eternal state of warfare that we seem to have drifted into yet again. I'd like to talk about Israel, Gaza, and about Ukraine and Russia. There's other issues as well. So if you're inclined to join us on the Daily Wire side, that's what's going to happen. And so I guess the other thing I'd just like to mention is we're going to see each other again in about 2 weeks in D.C., I believe, at the Rescue the Republic.
Rescue the Republic.
Yeah, that's been put together by Brett Weinstein. And
everybody should come to that. That's going to be one of the, if you care about the slide of America into censorship, surveillance, and totalitarianism, you want to be at this event, because this is going to be like the March on the Pentagon back in the 60s. It's going to be the biggest march ever, the biggest event ever, protesting the this really ugly
dissent.
Apocalypse for democracy.
Right. Well, all right, sir. Thank you very much. Hopefully the powers that be at YouTube will let this interview stand, because they took the last one down, which I wasn't very happy about. So I hope we didn't Oh, definitely. I hope we didn't transgress against any of the invisible rules, but we tried to. So thank you very much for coming to see me. It's much appreciated. And well, good luck with your continued negotiations with Trump. That's quite the twisting turn of affairs, and it's going to be quite something to see how this all plays out in the next 50 days. That's for sure. So everybody who's watching and listening, thank you very much for your time and attention, and give some consideration to coming to Washington, D.C. on September 29th for this Rescue the Republic event. It should be quite the thing, quite the celebration. That's how Weinstein characterized it. There's music there, as well as speeches from people whose ideas you actually might want to hear. So that's a once-in-a-generation event. So, make your way there. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you, Jordan.